Hello and welcome to The Well. I'm your host, Dr. Brendan Arm, Doctor of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine, Chinese medicine herbalist, and founder and director of Lotus Integrative Medicine, Santa Monica, California. There's a wealth of health-related information out there, and I'm joined today by this wonderful group of integrative and holistic medical doctors and practitioners to share some of our favorite wellness tips. Please let me introduce you to Bianca Rodriguez, a holistic psychotherapist, Dr. Heath McAllister, a naturopathic doctor and registered herbalist, and Dr. Rob Krochmal, a medical doctor and a practicing physician who is board certified in family medicine, nutrition, and integrative and holistic medicine. So let's begin. Today's topic is post-COVID weight gain. Who's going to start?
So I have found lots of my patients have expressed that they have gained a significant amount of weight under COVID. And I think that the reasons are pretty easy to understand, especially when, lockdown happened. You were encouraged not to really leave your house. So people were not exercising. They weren't going to gyms. Gyms closed down. People were even worried about going out and running on the street because of the threat of respiratory droplets somehow giving them the illness. So it was like inactivity central. And then, in terms of a lot of people they don't cook. They just don't cook at home. And I cook a lot, so it doesn't always occur to me that a lot of people would struggle with this, but people were eating takeout like crazy, and lots of takeout is very carb heavy and sweetened, and may not be the most nutritionally supportive food. You can definitely find better takeout, but most takeout is not nutritionally supportive. And so I think just from an accounting basis, people were generally taking in more calories and not burning as many calories. And it's just an accounting game. And so that's from a metabolic standpoint, that's what I see as a lot of the problem. And then we have like the mental emotional problem, which Bianca can get into, about like stress eating and emotional eating and not being connected to your community. And what does that do for you and your dopamine levels and your desire for, you're wanting to be happy. And, food is one of those things that a lot of people reach for when they're not feeling good. So I think all these issues kind of globally led to at least most of my patients had a significant weight gain.
Yeah, I just to speak to, the stress eating, I think what's interesting is I was sort of thinking about the beginning of quarantine. And I remember for me, it felt sort of like this very novel kind of like, oh, this is kind of interesting. It's scary, but it was also sort of like, I don't know, feeling like I needed to treat myself, because I was in this sort of new kind of experience. And I don't know, I think we have so many different associations with food. And as you're saying, food is often comfort. If you grew up in a family where, if you were a kid and you would cry, they'd be like, here's a lollipop, here's a cookie, whatever. Just starting to notice if that's a way that you try to self-soothe. For me, it almost felt like it was like, yeah, kind of like a little treat, like, oh, this is happening now. So now I'm going to like kind of be out of my regular routine because I also cook a lot and allow myself to have these maybe foods that I wouldn't normally have. And so, yeah, I have found too that a lot of people are experiencing weight gain. What I think is interesting is, do you guys think that part of the weight gain, do we burn a lot of calories just getting in and out of our car and doing the daily things of life that we don't normally do? That's something that I've been thinking about a lot. Like, is it because I'm not running errands or maybe, taking my dog for short as many walks or something to that effect? Would that make much of a difference?
I think it could, not necessarily on a calorie burning basis per se. And we know at this point that weight loss is not necessarily just calories in and calories out, but probably more on an energetic level of movement and not getting stuck, not getting stagnated and slowing down in that way. And I think it speaks to your point of the emotional part of eating and not having other things to do. So you turn to eating. It's hard enough with nutritionally, we're attached to food, but especially when there's nothing else to do, you can't go out, you can't get in your car. This is the only thing that can soothe you. So some of the tips that I've found, especially now as things are starting to open up, and as we realize, as Heath was alluding to, that outdoor, the aerosols don't really build up. We've talked a lot about masks as a country, but we haven't talked a lot about the really good aerosol science that's been done, and the fact that there really is no transmission, or essentially no transmission by contact. There's really no transmission outdoor unless you're right up in somebody's face. But getting out to farmers markets, instead of soothing yourself by getting a treat that is not good for you, soothe yourself by going and getting something that is actually healthy, meeting a farmer, going to a farmer's market, and kind of still treat yourself, but change the dynamic of that and treat yourself in a way that's actually making yourself healthier, rather than what inevitably will happen if you treat yourself in the other way.
I'd like to add to what the three of you guys are talking about from a Chinese perspective. There's been so much stress over the last year, and a lot of people, there's so much worrying and brooding and pensiveness and overthinking from a Chinese perspective that makes the digestion energy, or they call it the spleen qi, gets weakened through excessive studying or worrying or pensiveness or brooding. And when the spleen energy gets depleted from, fueling all these thought processes, then there's less energy for the spleen to control the digestion or to manage the digestion or metabolism. So if you're using up all your energy to fuel the mind, and there's less from the digestion and metabolism, then there's weight gain. That's the, to keep it very simple.
Makes sense to me, right? It's like if the body and the mind, as we've all know here, is connected, if you're utilizing a lot of energy up here in one place, there's less energy to be used to go around and do all the different functions of the body, but also I would imagine to feel motivated to move the body. If you think about folks that struggle with depression and anxiety, oftentimes exercising is a real challenge for them, but it's one of the best treatments. I tell my folks, and as a person that has sort of a, ongoing sort of history with anxiety, it's not a luxury to exercise. It's kind of like drinking water. It's like, if you want to be well, you kind of need to move your body. You kind of need to get that energy out and get that energy moving in a certain way. And I think it's been really hard for folks that really, I know a lot of people who really like the gym or really like their classes. And so that was a period of adjustment too, of not being able to do that and having to figure out, well, what can I do instead? I'm an at-home exerciser. So for me, it was not as hard, but I really have seen it, really having to problem solve with people because those things either weren't an option or they had their own additional anxiety attached to them. It's been an adjustment for sure.
And I also want to kind of chime in, when you look at the two different types of foods, some that may be very good for the spleen or the digestion, and others that are not so good for the spleen and the digestion, we tend, when we're stressed out, to go towards the stuff that isn't so good for the digestion. So we go more towards the sugar, the refined carbs, the fried foods, the greasy foods, the comfort foods. Those take more energy from the digestion to break down. And if at some point you're out of energy, then your body doesn't break it down into, then your body doesn't break down the food into energy and just stores it as fat. So it's a tough one because we're not eating as much of those foods that would probably be better for us to eat or metabolize, getting into more like the root vegetables, the cooked stewed, root vegetables, deep leafy greens that are cooked. We're doing less of that, and we're going more to like the carbs and the sugars and the alcohol and stuff like this.
I think that's an important thing to point out because, I was having this fun little habit of eating these really good gluten-free crackers in the middle of the night. And I just would wake up and be eating crackers during the pandemic in the middle of the night. I don't think I was actually hungry. And I brought it up to my, functional doctor. And he said to me, well, when your body is stressed, it often craves salt. And I kind of, that's the thing, right? Your body either craves salt or sugar. So it sort of speaks to what Brendan's saying, which is like, those aren't the best things for you to eat, but your body is craving them. What do you guys have to say about that?
I think it pads the emotions. it helps dampen, if you have more of that inflammation around you, it feels like more protection. You don't have to deal with the crisis on hand. You don't have to deal with the pandemic the same way. It doesn't have such a, you can check out, it helps us to survive. So it's even though it may not be the healthiest long-term strategy, it maybe is a very good strategy to get you through the day. Maybe, but
Cravings like
but
that.
it makes you gain weight.
With cravings, I think it's two-part. It can be something that your body's actually missing, and it can be something that your body's craving because you're not in balance. So, I don't think we got into this yet, but Leona wanted to talk about intuitive eating at some point. So we'll probably get into that topic, but I think that's, that can be a useful tool, and it can really backfire if you're not in a stable position where you're, like you say, Bianca, sometimes when you crave salt, it's because salt does various different things that are important in the body, including one of those is maintaining blood pressure. That if you have enough salts in your bloodstream, you can also have enough water to make your vessels be fully engorged. And your adrenal glands produce a hormone called aldosterone, and that naturally kind of raises your blood pressure. And if your adrenal glands are exhausted from chronic stress, you may not be secreting enough aldosterone. So a secondary mechanism would be crave salt. Crave salt because we need to keep our blood pressure up. So, that's it's your body telling you something that is a need because you're not in balance. And it's that chronic stress that's kind of leading you to be out of balance.
So I would say if somebody is having those types of cravings, that it's a good idea to speak to your doctor and bring it up and figure out, is this actually a symptom that something is not in balance? And so I would be producing this maybe naturally, but now I'm having this kind of craving for eating too. And in my case, it's true.
It may not show up in the lab. It may be more of like a functional problem, but I do think that generally speaking, with modern diets, we don't lack for salt. They add salt for everything. So, if you're eating anything that's remotely processed, you're getting enough salt. We don't have salt deficiency, really. If you lived in the Midwest in the 1700s, maybe you had salt deficiency and all that. But right now, it's usually going to indicate a little bit more of an imbalance. And it's also that we've become accustomed to having such strong flavors all the time: intense sweet, intense sour, intense salt. And really, if you do say a raw food cleanse where you just eat raw fruits and vegetables for 2 weeks, it will completely reset your taste buds. And then you'll eat a carrot and be like, oh my God, this is so sweet. Or you eat an asparagus spear and be like, good God, I never knew it tasted sweet. It's because now you're not over, you're not needing those intense flavors. You're actually tasting the true flavor of the food.
To that point, though, I would add that sometimes when you do a cleanse like that, and you're used to the added salt from takeout food, that salt is more like table salt. Very few restaurants are using sea salt, which has other minerals and can be very good for you as well. So some people on a cleanse like that will need to add some sea salt to their diet, and often that raises energy levels quite a bit. Or if you do transition to cooking at home, you usually need to add some salt. Be amazed at how much salt you add is not even close to what they add in a restaurant. So I wouldn't underestimate just having at least a bottle of sea salt at home.
Yeah, and I would qualify that too, like Dr. Rob said, not necessarily table salt, which is sodium chloride, which is, it's important. But if you have a sea salt, or you can get these other things like potassium salts, which really potassium is one of the most valuable electrolytes that we can have on board. We don't really get enough of. You can get either a broad spectrum salt or a potassium salt, and those are way more nutritionally impactful.
Well, that's all the time we have today. If you have a topic you'd like to learn more about, let us know with a comment on social media. And also don't forget to subscribe to our The Well YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us, and please join us next time for more wellness tips. Remember, regardless of where we are, our resources in The Well are limitless.